When I think back to my bar mitzvah way too many years ago, it's hard not to feel that the rabbis who instituted this rite of passage in the Middle Ages were a bit sadistic. It's not that they were being purposely cruel. Their intentions were admirable, crafting a way to celebrate the transition between childhood and adulthood through communal leadership, educational attainment, and spiritual growth. And yes, at the time in which lifespans were far shorter than today, 13 was considered middle-aged and marriage eligible, ready to start a family and a life of one's own. So some rootedness in values and faith for those launched in their teen years was prudent. But in the modern era, to be 13 is to be tempest-tossed in a perfect storm of awkwardness and self-consciousness, skin often afflicted with the leprosy of the hormonal moment, limbs swirling around in a gangly tangle, and for many, growth spurts still months away from standing at the bema without a booster. What an ideal time to be required to sing publicly in another language in front of friends, family, and the world. For me, add the Prince Valiant haircut, the gleaming rail tracks of braces that blinded photographers, and the mid-70s three-piece disco suit. And the least embarrassing element of that mortifying melange was the probability of a cracking voice that could crack glass. And yet, even with all that justifiably racked my sense of self and infused my insecurities, I clearly recall how I felt a unique and profound sense of pride in what I had accomplished, and how the community can now count on me, and in the place that I had taken, that I had earned in the precious chain of the generations that came before me and of those that would follow. Now that I have had the honor and privilege of standing on the other side of the equation for literally hundreds of young people, including my own children, I am constantly amazed and admiring of how our young adults navigate the tension between angst and accomplishment, between the humiliation of the moment and the pride that lasts a lifetime. It may seem strange that a single experience can span the chasm between humiliation and pride, but that close contradiction is a staple of our lives, echoed in the jarring proximity of grief to celebration, despair to hope, bane to blessing. And it is a spiritual seesaw embraced by our tradition, which seeks to make meaning and glean holiness from life's opposing forces. All of us have felt the sting of humiliation as children, bullied and berated for anything that might distinguish us from the tyranny of kiddie conformity. And those scars don't ever truly heal, do they? We learn to laugh them off, attribute them to the hard knocks of growing up, donning them as a badge of honor that helped us become who we are. But they are often there, subtly and in the background, an enduring ache that can still turn a current slight or careless word into something more. And when you expand this individual experience to cultures or countries, it is not surprising that feelings of humiliation are at the root of so much that ails us in our increasing inability to go along, get along, and give a little bit to each other. There are so many elements that have led to the current unraveling of our social fabric, from the lack of character building in our classrooms to distrust of the institutions that used to unite us in common cause toward the common good. But of all the causes of our current state of division and conflict, humiliation is the driving force behind much of the unprecedented polarization that afflicts our politics, frays our families, and renders us incapable of thoughtful debate, civic discourse, or civil solidarity. We cannot disagree without demonizing. For you are not just wrong in your ideas and views, you are evil in your effort to condescend, to belittle, to make me feel less than. We aren't interested in the intent of your wrong word or errant act, only the impact. For there are no accidents or mistakes, only grudging revelations of your cruelty, contempt, and inherent moral failings. We cannot cross that indelible tribal line and admit that you are right, or that we are wrong, or that we might agree. For you are the other, the borders too deeply etched, the wounds too deeply gouged, the pain of what you did and how it made me feel too fresh and too forward to move even an inch from my side to your side, even if we used to be on the same side not too many years ago. The deplorables cannot abide the dilettantes. The elites cannot endure the ignorant. The coastal courtiers cannot deign to engage the flyover hillbillies. The woke cannot fathom the working person. And waiting in the wings are the cynical, the scheming, and the soulless, who exploit this politics of humiliation and despair, convincing the vulnerable to vote against their self-interest, the marginalized to anchor their identity in victimhood, and the whole lot of us to give up hope that our lives and our world will ever be anything other than this. Last night, I shared a concept in our tradition that arose from the darkest moments of our history, sinat chinam, senseless and wanton hatred. When our ancestors had to justify why God would let the Romans destroy the Second Temple, sinat chinam, divisive conflict and the violence that grows from it, seemed a far more powerful force than Titus's legions. But the rabbis went even further, recounting a tale that personalizes the challenge, seeing it as a building block of the coming catastrophe. A man held a dinner party and invited his friend, Kamsa. But instead, there was a mix-up, and the host's enemy, Bar Kamsa, came instead. The host confronted Bar Kamsa and demanded that he leave. Bar Kamsa begged the host not to shame him, agreeing to pay for his dinner, even going so far as to be willing to pay for the entire meal. The host was unmoved. The rabbis who were in attendance said nothing to prevent this clear violation of Jewish ethics. Bar Kamsa left in disgrace, swearing vengeance by vowing to inform on his callous community to the Roman authorities. Bar Kamsa frames the Jewish community through some complications involving the sacrifices, infuriating the Romans enough to provoke them into destroying the temple and exiling our people, an exclusion from the land that lasted 2,000 years. The rabbis conclude, quote, because of the difference between the names Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, the temple was destroyed. Through this fable, the rabbis share a critical insight. The humiliation we feel as individuals, if joined in a web of woe across communities, can destroy our institutions, undermine our trust in one another, and erode our collective soul. But within this disease of the body politic lies its remedy, a healing balm for our singular struggles and our societal ills. Maimonides, the medieval theologian, physician, and a source of character cultivation, built on Aristotle's concept of the golden mean, the balanced midpoint between personality traits that provide health for a person and vitality for a people. So often in our culture today, we counter our feelings of humiliation with an outsized pride, an out-of-control ego, a rampant arrogance that is built more on the shifting sands of circumstance than the firm foundations of character. Maimonides counsels us not to careen from the extremes of abject humiliation to unearned pride. Rather, the midpoint between them is humility, in Hebrew, anava. It is a quality that is encouraged in our day-to-day lives, but it is also the counterintuitive attribute that most defines Jewish leadership in relation to the larger culture of the ancient world up to this very moment. Power, riches, fame, charisma, and the ability to evoke fear are the currency of ancient monarchs and certain candidates for office. Our tradition understands that some of these are the inevitable tools of the leader. But if they do not emerge from a core and defining humility, they will lead to bad judgment, rampant abuse, and the ultimate destruction of our culture. No less a figure than Moses himself was described as the most humble man ever, even in the face of rebellion amongst his followers and the jealous undermining of his siblings. It certainly helps when God has your back and can suck your enemies into a gaping hole in the earth, but the larger lesson still applies. Even kings of Israel were constrained by this prerequisite for power and lost their standing when they strayed. How much more should we strive to tame an excess of pride, often born from the depths of humiliation, into a healthy sense of humility? Because of this emphasis in Judaism, there is much wisdom to draw upon. There is even a whole category of literature, musar, which focuses on developing midot, healthy and worthy virtues, amongst them humility. And there are two snippets of counsel that powerfully illustrate this priority. One comes from the Hasidic master, Rabbi Simcha Bunim, who used to say, everyone must have two pockets with a note in each pocket so that he or she can reach into one or the other, depending on the need. When feeling lowly and depressed, one should reach into the right pocket and there find the words, "For my sake was the world created." But when feeling high and mighty, one should reach into the left pocket and find the words, "I am but dust and ashes." The second teaching comes from another master, Rav Zusia of Anapoli, who on his deathbed shared, quote, "When I get to the afterlife, I am not afraid that they will ask me why I was not like Moses or King David. I will say that I couldn't be like them. I am afraid they will ask me, why weren't you like Zusia? And then what will I say?" Rav Simcha reminds us of the balance between confidence and compassion, reminding us that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And Rav Zusia's stark assessment at the end of his life reminds us that true greatness lies not in leaving a legacy for the ages, but in making the most of our God-given talents and opportunities. The great struggles, hurt, and conflict that divide our society will not be resolved with any one path forward or any time soon. But we've got to start somewhere, each of us as individuals, person to person, moment to moment, meeting each encounter as a chance to change something in ourselves, our attitudes, our words, and our actions. Seeing in one another not an obstacle to becoming who we should be, but a partner in becoming who we can be. Seeing our quest to be the best not as a zero-sum game, but as a value-added hope. And the healing of that hurt begins in the heart of humility. A story. Centuries ago, in the weeks leading up to these holy days, every Friday morning during the important penitential prayers, the Jews of Nemiroff confronted a mystery. Their rabbi vanished. He wasn't in the shul or in the house of study, and his home was empty. Where could the rabbi be, this important man whom all respected? He couldn't simply be absent at such a significant time. Why, He had to have ascended to the heavens, of course, doing what all rabbis do, pleading before God on behalf of his community during this holy season. Or so the people thought. A Litvak came to town, a born skeptic, more concerned with points of law than points of light. But it wasn't enough to merely mock and disillusion the faithful of Nemirov. The Litvak wanted to reveal the rabbi's true whereabouts, to bludgeon the community with knowledge that would both demonstrate his brilliance while demoralizing them for their foolishness. So the Litvak devised a plan. One night, he snuck into the rabbi's house and hid under his bed. He'd watch all night and discover what the rabbi was really up to. Morning came, and the rabbi slowly got out of bed, mumbled a few morning prayers, and to the Litvak's surprise, came from his closet wearing peasant clothes with a peasant rope hanging from his pocket and a small axe in his belt. The rabbi left, and the Litvak stealthily followed as the rabbi walked amongst the shadows. They came to a small wood at the outskirts of town. The rabbi took out his axe and began chopping a tree. He turned a trunk into logs and the logs into smaller sticks. He then bundled the sticks and tied the rope around it. When the rabbi returned to town, the Litvak slinking behind him, he stopped at a broken-down shack and knocked on the window. A sickly voice asked, "Who's there?" The rabbi answered in a peasant accent, "It is I, Vasily, coming to sell wood, very cheap." Without waiting, the rabbi went into the room. The woman complained that she was poor and sick and unable to pay. The rabbi answered, "You are a good Jewish woman with a great and mighty God. I can trust you with a few kopecks of wood." And without hesitation, the rabbi began to place the sticks into the small oven. As he did so, he began to recite the penitential prayers. As the fire grew and the warmth spread through the room to comfort the ailing woman, the rabbi's prayers grew stronger. The Litvak who saw this was humbled by this incredible expression of selfless service from this great sage, becoming a disciple of the rabbi. And ever after, when another disciple of the Rabbi of Nemirov tells how he ascends to heaven in the days before Rosh Hashanah, the Litvak no longer scoffs. He only adds quietly, if not higher. Amen.